Welcome to this 365 Freedom Strategy session. Today we're breaking down the mechanics of the sales belief reset and why your brand's biggest bottleneck is a story you should have stopped telling years ago.
Right, and I'm glad we're starting exactly there.
Yeah, because we really need to set the stage for you listening right now. Picture this entirely common scenario, right? You are, say, 45 minutes into a pitch for a $50,000 consulting contract.
A high-stakes environment.
Exactly. The prospect is nodding. The budget is clearly there. The logic of the deal holds up perfectly. You reach that exact moment where you simply need to state your price and ask for the business, and suddenly...
It seizes up.
Yes. Your throat tightens. Your breathing shifts up to your upper chest. And without even being asked, you immediately offer a 20% discount.
Happens all the time.
You start speaking twice as fast. You rush through the deliverables. You completely sabotage the close. So we are diagnosing this massive, entirely invisible leak in your conversion rates today. And to be absolutely clear right off the top, we are not having a discussion about sales tactics.
No, not at all.
We're not optimizing your scripts. We are not reviewing objection handling frameworks. And we're definitely not looking at closing techniques. We are examining the internal narrative running in the background of your operations. We're looking at how an outdated, unverified memory literally destroys your current sales power.
That framing is precisely where we need to start, because across the board, in almost every industry we analyze, sales confidence is just relentlessly misdiagnosed.
It's treated like a skill problem, right?
Exactly. It's treated as a skill problem. Founders, executives, high-level sales professionals, they constantly assume they're losing deals because they lack the right words or, the right email sequence.
Or the right tonal inflection in their pitch.
Yeah, exactly. They operate under this assumption that if they just find the perfect script, the friction will completely disappear. But it is not a skill problem. It is strictly a belief problem.
Right.
The core thesis we are operating from in this session is this. Your sales power returns the exact moment you stop selling from stories that are no longer true. When that outdated narrative is isolated and removed, the operational capacity of the seller scales almost instantly.
Hold on. Let me challenge that premise right away.
Yeah.
Saying it's strictly a belief problem feels a bit, I don't know, absolute.
Okay, how so?
Well, if a founder genuinely does not know how to handle a complex pricing objection, or if they have a fundamentally flawed offer, that is a structural skill issue, isn't it? Like, how can we isolate belief as the primary bottleneck when so many people simply lack the fundamental repetitions of selling?
It's a fair pushback. It really is. But we have to look at the sequencing of human behavior. Yes, technical skill matters, obviously. But the inability to execute that skill under pressure is dictated entirely by the underlying belief. You can memorize the greatest objection handling framework in the world, but if your internal belief system categorizes the act of handling an objection as, say, being combative...
your nervous system won't let you do it.
Precisely. Your nervous system will not allow you to deploy the skill. The belief acts as a governor on the engine of your capability.
So it's essentially a systems architecture issue.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah, like trying to fix a belief problem with new sales scripts is like trying to install a state-of-the-art operating system on a piece of hardware that is actively rejecting the code.
Right. It just won't run.
You can have the most elegant, highly optimized conversion script ever written, but if the foundational hardware, your internal belief system, is running a background process that says selling makes you manipulative, that hardware will reject the new code. You will sabotage the script, you'll rush the delivery, you'll drop your vocal tone, or you'll accidentally introduce friction just to avoid feeling like that negative label is true.
Exactly. And the financial fallout of this misdiagnosis is staggering. I mean, think about the immense waste of capital and time this causes in an organization.
Oh, it's massive.
A founder feels resistance on a sales call. The prospect hesitates and ultimately doesn't buy. The founder, who is driven by this hidden internal story of I am too pushy, feels profound psychological discomfort.
Right.
But instead of identifying the belief as the failure point, they look outward. They assume the marketing funnel is broken.
They blame the leads.
Yes. They assume the lead quality is poor. They assume the pricing model is fundamentally flawed.
Right, because looking at external metrics is emotionally safer than auditing your own psychological framework. It is much easier to blame a Facebook ad campaign than to admit you were terrified of asking for money.
And that avoidance creates a devastating feedback loop. They spend the next 3 months and tens of thousands of dollars completely rebuilding a marketing funnel that was actually working perfectly fine.
Wow.
They tweak the deliverables, they lower their prices, all to avoid addressing the fact that the true bottleneck is sitting right between their own ears. The belief dictates the action dictates the result, and the compromised result reinforces the false belief.
See, I knew I wasn't good at sales.
Exactly. The founder says exactly that, when in reality, they simply refuse to execute the fundamentals out of fear.
Which raises a massive causal question for you listening right now.
Yeah.
If these internal stories are so destructive and so insanely expensive in terms of lost revenue and wasted time, how does a highly competent, intelligent operator allow this to happen?
It's a fascinating paradox.
We are talking about brilliant people who build complex products and manage large teams. How do they allow a single internal narrative to overwrite their entire operational code? Where do these beliefs actually come from?
Well, the logical assumption is that a belief like, I am terrible at sales, must be the result of a long, heavily documented track record of failure.
Yeah, you'd think so.
You would think it comes from years of data proving incompetence. But when we analyze the origins of these internal narratives, they almost never stem from a pattern of reality.
Really?
No, they stem from one hyper-specific, emotionally charged moment from the past, a single data point that carried so much negative emotional weight that the brain permanently recorded it as universal truth.
So we aren't talking about a decade of bad performance. We are talking about one bad Tuesday in 2019 dictating the conversion rate of a multi-million-dollar business today.
That is exactly what we're talking about. And to understand how that happens, we need to examine the exact anatomy of what we call the pressure-fear microstory.
Let's break that down.
We have a highly documented case of an entrepreneur who operated for years under the absolute conviction that she was, in her own words, not good at sales. She avoided calls, she delegated closing to less qualified team members, and she continuously stunted her company's growth. When we trace the origin of that specific belief, it did not come from a failed business venture. It originated from a single awkward conversation years prior.
Let's analyze that specific conversation because the mechanics of it are fascinating. What actually happened?
He was pitching a prospect, and at the end of the call, the prospect explicitly told her they felt pressured by her pitch. That was it. One sentence.
Just, I feel pressured.
I feel pressured. The prospect didn't yell at her. The prospect didn't ruin her reputation online. They just expressed discomfort. But the impact of that one sentence on her psychological framework was catastrophic.
Wow.
That single phrase echoed in her mind during every new sales call she took from that day forward. She labeled herself as pushy, and that label became the permanent parameter of her performance.
Wait, I need to stop you there because this represents a structural flaw in how human beings process feedback. Why does human psychology prioritize the one comment that landed wrong over dozens of positive interactions?
It's a great question.
Like if she had 50 clients who loved working with her and one person who called her pushy, why does that one person get to sit on the board of directors for her sales identity?
It comes down to the evolutionary architecture of the brain. The nervous system does not possess a sense of time, nor does it care about statistical averages. It only possesses a sense of threat.
Survival mechanism.
Exactly. We have a negativity bias because historically, remembering the location of a predator was significantly more important for survival than remembering the location of a food source.
That makes sense.
Positive experiences are pleasant, but negative experiences are categorized by the brain as life-threatening data that must be permanently stored and constantly referenced.
So it's like an overly aggressive spam filter in an email inbox.
Yes.
You might get 100 legitimate, highly valuable emails from clients praising your work, but if the spam filter detects one tiny keyword that it associates with the threat, like the feeling of being perceived as pushy, it sends the entire million-dollar contract straight to the trash.
That is a highly accurate analogy.
The system is designed to protect you, but it is actually starving you of revenue.
Precisely. In that original awkward conversation, when she was accused of being pushy, her body registered a social threat. Humans are tribal animals. Social rejection historically meant physical death.
Right, if you get kicked out of the tribe, you don't survive.
Exactly. So her cortisol spiked, adrenaline entered the bloodstream, and her heart rate elevated. The amygdala, which is the threat detection center of the brain, categorized the specific act of asking for the sale as a high-threat environment.
And this is where it stops being just a psychological quirk and becomes a severe physiological reality. This isn't just a passing memory that she intellectually recalls.
No, it is very physical.
When she gets on a Zoom call years later with a brand new prospect, someone who has never met her, who is genuinely interested in her product, her body isn't reacting to the person on the screen.
No, it is not. Her brain pattern matches the current scenario, the pitch, the tension of the ask, the silence to the historical threat from years ago. The exact same physiological cascade occurs.
It's literally reliving it.
Yes. Her vision narrows, focusing only on perceived negative cues. Her throat tightens as the vocal cords constrict under stress. Her breathing becomes shallow, shifting from the diaphragm to the upper chest. She is experiencing a literal biological stress response to a memory.
She is essentially projecting a hallucination onto a very real, very present human being. Think about the damage that does to the prospect sitting across from you.
It's incredibly disruptive.
The prospect is sitting there, giving you buying signals, asking logical questions about implementation or pricing, and suddenly your energy completely shifts.
Yeah.
You start acting defensive, or you start pulling back and over-explaining because you are defending yourself against the memory of the person who called you pushy years ago.
And the current prospect is completely bewildered. They sense the anxiety, they sense the tension.
So we pick up on that stuff automatically.
We do. Humans are highly evolved to mirror the nervous system of the person leading the interaction. If the seller enters a state of physiological panic, the prospect's nervous system detects that instability and categorizes the seller as unsafe.
So the prospect gets anxious too.
Yes, the prospect becomes anxious too, and an anxious prospect does not buy. The sabotage is automatic, it is entirely subconscious, and it guarantees the exact failure the seller was afraid of in the first place.
It is an absolute tragedy to let an outdated, statistical outlier of a memory dictate your present operational reality.
Yeah.
You are allowing the least qualified person you have ever spoken to, the person who didn't even buy from you, to manage your sales department.
That is the reality for thousands of operators right now. And the critical realization is that this self-sabotage will continue indefinitely until the founder makes a conscious, deliberate decision to stress test their memory against actual reality.
Right.
The nervous system will keep running the threat protocol until you provide it with overwhelming empirical proof that the threat no longer exists.
Okay, but memory is notoriously unreliable. Every time you access a memory, you rewrite it. Over the years, that one awkward conversation probably morphed in her head until it felt like a massive, aggressive confrontation, when in reality, it was probably just a mildly uncomfortable silence.
Oh, absolutely. It gets distorted.
If our internal data is corrupted, how exactly do we stress test it?
You cannot stress test it with feelings. You have to stress test it with hard data and precise definitions. You have to look at the technical definitions of what you are actually so afraid of.
Okay.
We need to clearly define what constitutes a bad or pushy sales call versus a clear, effective one. This entrepreneur initiated an audit of her reality. She didn't rely on her memory, she went to the physical evidence.
What did she look at?
She opened up her CRM, she went into her email archives, and she systematically read through past client communications, testimonials, and feedback.
And what she found completely contradicted the dominant narrative running her life. She found a massive, undeniable pattern. Her clients were constantly, repeatedly thanking her. And they weren't just thanking her for the product. They were explicitly thanking her for making the decision-making process feel clear.
That word is the crux of this entire psychological reset. Clarity.
Clarity.
Not once in all of that archived communication did a single person mention pushiness. They explicitly noted that they appreciated her honesty. They felt incredibly supported in making their decisions without any pressure whatsoever. The dissonance between the hard data in her CRM and the terrifying story in her head was absolute.
This highlights a massive blind spot for founders. We need to draw a hard technical line right now between pushiness and clarity because operators conflate the two constantly, and it paralyzes their growth. Let's define the actual mechanics of both, starting with pushiness. What is it, functionally, in a sales environment?
Pushiness is fundamentally about forcing an agenda. It is an extraction mechanism.
Extraction.
When someone is operating from a state of pushiness, they are entirely prioritizing the seller's need, the quota, the revenue, the ego validation over the buyer's reality. A pushy salesperson ignores the prospect's actual context, dismisses their legitimate concerns, and attempts to bulldoze them into compliance.
It's all about what the seller wants.
Exactly. It is an act of coercion driven entirely by the seller's anxiety to close the gap between their current lack of resources and the prospect's wallet.
Pushiness is aggressive, it is self-centered, and frankly, it is low-status behavior. It reeks of desperation. But clarity is the exact opposite of extraction.
A completely different mechanism.
Clarity is about providing an honest, grounded, perfectly illuminated environment where the buyer feels completely supported to make the correct choice for themselves.
Exactly. Clarity requires the seller to ask the hard, uncomfortable questions. It requires the seller to clearly articulate the cost of an action. It requires the seller to hold up a mirror to the prospect's current situation and say, this is where you are, this is the pain you are experiencing, this is where you want to be, and this is exactly the mechanism required to bridge that gap.
But here is the friction. Providing clarity often feels uncomfortable to the seller.
Yeah.
Especially to a seller running that pressure fear background program, because providing clarity requires extreme directness.
It does. It requires holding your ground.
It requires holding space during a silent moment on the call instead of rushing to fill the void with chatter. It requires looking the prospect in the eye and telling them an inconvenient truth about their business that they have been avoiding.
And because these founders are absolutely terrified of being perceived as the pushy villain from their outdated memory, they misinterpret the natural discomfort of directness as the danger of pushiness.
They mix up the signals.
They feel the tension of a high-stakes conversation, and their corrupted internal software screams, "Warning, you are being pushy, back off."
The result of that misinterpretation is devastating to the prospect. To avoid the feeling of being pushy, the founder actively withholds clarity.
Yes.
When the prospect needs them to be direct and authoritative, the founder softens their language. When the prospect needs a firm, expert recommendation on which package to choose, the founder offers 5 different wishy-washy options and says, whatever you think is best. They retreat. They back away from the tension of the decision.
And what happens to the prospect in that moment? They are abandoned.
Totally left hanging.
The prospect came to you for expertise, they came to you for leadership, because they are currently incapable of solving their own problem.
Yeah.
And right at the crucial moment of decision, the moment where they need you to confidently guide them across the finish line, you abandon them in a state of confusion.
Just to protect yourself.
Exactly, because you were too busy protecting your own ego from feeling like a stereotypical salesperson.
I want to really hammer that home for you listening. If you are sitting on a call and you know objectively that your product is the exact right fit for the person across from you, but you hedge your pitch, you drop your volume, and you refuse to clearly ask for the business because you don't want to feel salesy, you are not being noble.
Not at all.
You are being selfish. You are letting them walk back into the burning building of their current problem because you were too scared to clearly point to the exit. That is the actual cost of conflating pushiness with clarity.
It is a profound failure of leadership disguised as politeness. Guiding someone through a decision is an act of service, not an act of coercion. Withholding that guidance out of a misplaced fear of looking bad prioritizes the seller's emotional comfort over the buyer's absolute need for a solution.
So if an operator accepts this reality, if they realize right now that their fear of pushiness is actually destroying their ability to provide clarity, how do they structurally fix it? Because realizing the difference intellectually is obviously only the first step.
Right, the logic isn't enough.
I can logically know that I am not being pushy, but if my throat still tightens when I state my price, the logic hasn't penetrated the hardware.
You are entirely correct. The nervous system does not care about your intellectual realizations. It only cares about threat and safety. You cannot rationalize your way out of a physiological response.
So what's the mechanism?
Therefore, a founder needs a precise mechanical system to permanently uninstall the old story. They need a mechanism to force the nervous system to prioritize the new, safe data over the old, threatening data.
Which brings us to the actual mechanics of the sales belief reset. This is the operational protocol to patch the corrupted software. It does not start with vague, feel-good affirmations. It starts with precision targeting of the corrupted file. You have to isolate the specific old belief you are carrying.
Yes, isolation is step 1. Usually this belief disguises itself in a sentence that starts with, I am not the kind of person who...
Oh, like a self-imposed label.
Exactly. For example, an operator might tell themselves, I am not the kind of person who is aggressive with pricing, or I am not the kind of person who is good at handling conflict on a call. You have to write that exact sentence down. You have to pull the invisible script out of the subconscious and put it on paper where it can be objectively examined.
Once you have isolated that specific limiting statement, what is the next mechanical step? Because I know this is where people usually default to positive thinking, which we've established is useless against a nervous system threat response.
The protocol demands that you hold that limiting statement up directly against the unvarnished truth of your recent results. You must list 3 real, highly specific documented examples from your recent operational experience that definitively prove the old belief is inaccurate.
Why specifically 3 examples? Why not just one massive win or a general sense of doing a good job?
Because of how the brain categorizes data. One example of success can easily be dismissed by a skeptical brain as a fluke or an anomaly.
Right, I just got lucky.
Exactly. 2 examples can be rationalized away as a mere coincidence, but 3 distinct, documented examples establish a verifiable pattern of reality. The brain is a pattern recognition machine. When it sees 3 sequential points of data contradicting the old belief, it is forced to reevaluate the threat level.
Let's be brutally clear about this for the listener. This is an empirical process. This is a forensic audit of real data. You're not standing in front of a mirror shouting, "I am a sales warrior. I am a closer."
No, please don't do that.
That does not work because your brain knows you are lying to it. Positive thinking layered over a fundamental belief problem is just painting over rot. What we're doing here is forcing the brain to look at undeniable historical proof that the environment has fundamentally changed.
Let us examine the physiological mechanics of why this empirical audit actually works. When you write down those 3 specific instances of providing clarity without pressure, when you physically read the words of gratitude from your recent clients, you are actively training the nervous system.
It's physical training.
It is. You are sending a signal from the prefrontal cortex, which is the logical analytical center of the brain, down to the amygdala, the primitive threat detection center.
You are essentially manually overriding the alarm system.
Precisely. The signal from the prefrontal cortex says, look at this data. The current environment is safe. The act of selling no longer results in social rejection. It results in gratitude, it results in problem solving, and it results in revenue. Deactivate the threat response.
And when you allow that current evidence to actually matter, when you let the weight of 3 successful, grateful clients override the weight of one grumpy person from 5 years ago, the physical tension in your body literally breaks.
It is an immediate shift.
When the entrepreneur we analyzed finally released that old story, the physical shift was immediate and measurable. Her voice became steadier. Her physical presence became calmer.
We must analyze that physical shift deeply because it is the absolute linchpin of conversion.
Yeah.
Why does the voice become steadier? It is pure biology.
Biology, right.
When the nervous system stops perceiving the sales pitch as a threat, the sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight mechanism, deactivates. The parasympathetic nervous system takes over.
Rest and digest state.
Exactly. The diaphragm relaxes, allowing for deeper, more controlled respiration. The vocal cords, which tighten and thin out under stress, raising the pitch of the voice, relax back to their natural state. The result is a richer, lower, significantly more resonant vocal tone.
And what does a steadier, resonant voice communicate to the prospect on the other side of the table? It communicates subconscious safety. We are highly evolved primates, and we are constantly subconsciously scanning the people around us for microsignals of confidence, stability, or panic.
Exactly. If a founder is pitching a high-ticket offer, but their voice is tight, their breathing is shallow, and they are speaking rapidly, the prospect's primitive brain screams, "This leader is in danger, do not follow them."
They don't even know why they're saying no.
Right. The prospect won't even know why they are saying no. They will just say, it doesn't feel right. But when the internal evidence gathering creates that external physical calm, the prospect subconsciously trusts you. Your physiological calm regulates their nervous system. That is why the physical reality of your nervous system is the ultimate sales tool.
But this raises a massive practical challenge. I can hear founders listening to this right now saying, okay, I did the audit, I found the 3 pieces of positive evidence in my CRM, but I still feel the anxiety.
Of course, it's a habit.
They collect the great feedback, but they mentally discount it. They tell themselves, oh, that client was just being nice, or that deal is an easy one, it doesn't count. How does a founder force themselves to weigh current evidence heavier than past trauma?
It requires a conscious, aggressive refusal to indulge the outdated memory. Every time the old story pops up, every time your brain says, careful, you're being pushy, you have to treat it like a glitch in the software.
Just a bug in the system.
You cannot entertain it. You literally interrupt the thought pattern and say, that is bad data. That is an outdated file. And you immediately force your attention back to the 3 pieces of empirical evidence.
It takes rigorous repetition. You are carving a new neural pathway. You are rewiring the hardware to accept the new operating system. And you do this not just for the sake of feeling better on a Zoom call, but because of the massive strategic advantage it provides when you finally rebuild your sales identity on actual truth.
Which leads us directly into the ultimate result of this entire process. The result of this operational reset is not just a single closed deal. It is a complete structural reset in how the founder sees themselves as a seller.
A new identity.
You are engaging in active identity construction. When you successfully allow the current evidence to dictate your reality, you are no longer selling from who you were years ago. You are selling from who you are right now.
And who are you now? You are someone who has survived the learning curve. You are someone who has refined their offer. You are someone who is constantly improving. And most importantly, you are someone who is already helping people make grounded, intelligent decisions.
Exactly.
The old identity, the amateur who stumbled through an awkward conversation 5 years ago and felt pushy, that person does not exist anymore. They are gone. But if you keep dragging their memory into every current meeting, you are severely handicapping your current potential.
The beauty of this identity construction is that it does not require delusion. You do not need to erase the past. You do not need to hypnotize yourself into pretending that the awkward conversation never happened.
Right, we're not ignoring reality.
It happened. It was uncomfortable. You made a mistake. But acknowledging its historical existence is very different from granting it current authority. You simply need to revoke its power to define how you show up in the present moment. Your sales identity must be built on the solid bedrock of current truth, on the empirical data of your recent successes, not on the quicksand of historical fear.
Let's look at the ultimate strategic advantage of operating from that bedrock. When a founder is operating from their current truth, when they know exactly the value they provide, when they have the empirical data to prove their clarity is appreciated, they develop an absolutely steady, unshakable presence.
A grounded presence.
And that steady presence makes them completely impervious to the normal, everyday anxieties of closing a deal.
They don't panic when the prospect asks for a 20% discount.
Okay.
They don't crumble and immediately start negotiating against themselves when the prospect says, I need to think about it.
Why?
Because their identity is no longer tied to whether this specific person buys or not. Their identity is securely tied to their ability to provide clarity.
That detachment is the absolute hallmark of mastery. When you're no longer trying to prove to yourself that you aren't a pushy person, you are finally free to just be wildly effective. You stop performing for a memory, and you start serving the prospects sitting right in front of you.
You can ask the incisive, highly challenging questions that actually move the needle.
Because you know your intent is pure. You know the data supports your methodology. The friction completely leaves the process.
The hardware and the software are finally in total alignment. And when that happens, the conversion rate naturally, effortlessly scales up to match the quality of the product because the artificial bottleneck of the founder's outdated memory has been entirely removed. We move from fear-based selling to evidence-based leadership.
And it all hinges on what you actively choose to believe about the data sitting right in front of you. You have the proof, you just have to allow it to matter. So here's the final reflection I want to leave you with. The prospect on your next call is evaluating the person sitting in front of them right now. Don't punish them by making them negotiate with a version of you that hasn't existed for years. If you're ready to rebuild your sales identity on truth instead of fear, visit 365 Freedom online to join the community. This has been a 365 Freedom strategy session.